Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. Okay, welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Today's guest is a former coworker of mine from the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. We worked a lot of the same units together, and I was always impressed by his resilience, his unwavering faith at work and, working in the prison and at home, and his leadership and drive that he always had to make himself better. So, as you'll hear today, retirement has not slowed him down any. Wally, welcome to the Prison Officer Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking to you. It's going to be fun.
Now, if I mess up, I'm used to calling you Henry, but it seems most others call you Wally. Which do you prefer?
Yes. I prefer Wally now. The prison was the only place I was ever called Henry, so I've been called Wally my whole life.
Okay. And before we get started, I just saw on Facebook that congratulations are in order today for you. 42 years of marriage.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations.
42 years. Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite an accomplishment these days, and it's quite an accomplishment as a correctional officer.
Indeed.
So I always like to start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about, where and how you grew up.
Well, that could be a long story, but we'll try to make it short. I was born in Arizona, raised in Oklahoma, went to high school in Colorado, went to college in Virginia, back to Colorado, back to Virginia, went to the Marine Corps, North Carolina, Indiana, got out of the Marine Corps from Indiana, went to Springfield, Missouri, and could not find a job. And that's how I ended up working at the federal prison. I was raised in mostly small towns in Oklahoma. When I went to Colorado, we were in just outside of Denver. Corrections, law enforcement. Law enforcement was one thing that most boys have in the back of their mind. They like to be a cop, or they see the cop shows and that kind of thing. But certainly I never planned on being in corrections. But when I got out of the Marine Corps in 1990, we moved to Springfield, Missouri. Springfield was kind of halfway between my wife's family in Virginia, my family in Colorado. We had always lived near one of the other. We figured, let's live in between. So we moved to Springfield. I had a job lined up that looked good with the Springfield Police Department, but when I got there, I found out that I ended up just missing the cut by about 3 people. They were hiring 40, and I was 43rd on the list. So we got to Springfield with no job, nothing that I had in the works. Somebody mentioned to me on the offhand remark at a grocery store, when I met somebody, we're talking to them, they said, well, what about the federal prison up here? And I said, I had no idea there was a federal prison. I didn't know what a federal prison was. So I applied at the Springfield Medical Center. I applied on a Friday. This was mid-December. I applied on a Friday, got called on Monday for an interviewed on Tuesday, and a week later they called me up and said, do you like to start in February or January? I said, let's start in January because I need a job. That was it. There I was.
There you go. So what did your dad do for a living? Mom and dad, what did they do for a living? And so what kind of household did you grow up with? Brothers and sisters?
Yeah. Yes, I was the oldest of 4 siblings, total 4 of us. I had 1 brother and 2 sisters. I was the oldest. Dad was basic laborer, didn't have a lot of education. I don't think he ever finished high school. So he spent most of his life working in labor jobs, loading docks, construction, window washing, janitorial work, just anything to make a living. Mom was a nurse. She'd been a nurse from the time she got out of high school and then went to nursing school. She'd been a nurse for a lot of years. And she worked a lot of odd shifts, so she was gone a lot when we were home, depending on what shift she was working. Dad worked primarily during the day. So that's kind of what that was. I had a good family, but today you would probably call it dysfunctional. Dad was a rough character, was in the Navy for a number of years. Just he was hard to get along with sometimes. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to dishonor my father, but sometimes he was hard to get along with.
I had one of those too. So, but that's kind
Yeah.
of your father being in the Navy, your mother being a nurse. It's kind of where you picked up the public service from. Was there somebody in law
Yes,
enforcement in
yes,
your
yes.
family that you knew, or
No, Dad was
okay,
not. No one in my family was in the law enforcement community at all. It just law enforcement was not really in my plans. This really wasn't there. It just happened to work out that way for me.
so after high school, is that when you went? You went in the Marines?
Now I went off to 2 years of Bible college. Actually, went from
Okay,
Colorado out to Virginia to go to Liberty Baptist College. It was a 2 year, just 2 year Bible Institute program. I kind of had thought about going into the ministry at that time. That did work out after 2 years of Bible college. Ended up working for a little while in various jobs, and then went to the Marine Corps from there. Needed a job and had a friend who was in the Marines, and he talked me into it. And that's why I went in the Marines. I spent 10 years doing that.
what was your MOS in the Marines? What'd you do there?
I was artillery and naval gunfire forward observer. It's called 0861. It was the actual designation. But I was the guy that in a wartime situation would be out with the infantry out on the front lines looking for targets, calling in fire from the artillery group that we were with, or naval ships. I actually shot the USS Iowa battleship on live fire training exercises down in Puerto Rico just about a couple of years before she was completely decommissioned and retired. So that was kind of I was probably one of the last forward observers to call in fire off from that battleship. It was kind of an experience, quite an experience.
Wow, cool. So 10 years in the
Yeah.
Marines, and now is that where you met your wife?
No, my wife and I met about a year after I got out of high school. We were camp counselors together at a summer camp there in Lynchburg, Virginia. Summer camp for kids. She was
Mm-hmm.
a counselor. I was a counselor. We met, started talking, started dating every Friday night during camp all summer long, and that was it. We were hooked. We got married on that same camp a year later, down on Treasure Island in
Great,
the James River in Lynchburg, Virginia.
excellent. So you move to Springfield, you get the job at the Federal Medical Center. Yeah, I started off the same exact way. I walked into prison not knowing anything about it. So, what were your first thoughts as a rookie at the Federal Medical Center?
It was a little bit nerve-wracking at the very beginning. When I walked through the gates the first time and the doors closed behind me, and I knew I was locked inside there with all these prisoners, I had no idea what to expect. I thought I was going to be attacked. There was going to be danger. I was a little nervous at first, but I knew I needed a job. And as a Marine, you just suck it up and do what you have to do. You just get the job done. So I kept hanging in there. It got a little more comfortable as time went on. Got a little more used to it. When I found out that not every inmate there was out to kill me, I felt a lot better about things.
Right. So, did you start off mainly working in the mental health unit, or where'd they throw you in at there at the beginning?
Most of it, at the beginning, I worked in two building in the medical units, two building and three building, a little bit in one building, 1-4. I kind of started off there in the medical units, working with some of the other older officers. But they did throw me in during my initial rotations. They kind of threw me in 10 building a couple of times too, and that was quite an experience as well. Working with those guys. I mean, some of the things that I saw right off the bat, I thought to myself, what am I doing here, and why am I even in this place? These people are nuts, literally crazy.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it was. I mean, I had been around mental health, and I'd worked at Leavenworth a couple of years before I came to Springfield. But there's nothing prepares you for the mental health unit at Springfield. I tell everybody that if you take the Federal Bureau
Oh
of
no.
Prisons and condense the mental health down into the cream of mushroom soup of mental health, they're all there. All 300
Yeah.
of them.
Oh yeah.
So two building, you probably saw a lot of the high profiles that came through. Anybody catch your eye back then?
At the beginning, I'm not so much in the beginning. The high profile guys that I worked with that I knew about came later in my career. But I had John Gotti there. I had
Right.
the blind sheik, Omar Abdul Rahman, there in 10 building for a while. He tried to get me fired once. Most of the famous inmates I worked with were probably out when I was at the ADX at the Supermax in Colorado. I spent 5 years out there in the middle of my career. And that's where most of the infamous inmates that I
Ah.
worked with.
So tell me about the ADX and your thoughts while you were working out there.
That was that was an interesting place. There were a lot of people there that you knew if they had the chance, they would kill you in a heartbeat and turn right back over and go to sleep and not even raise their heartbeat probably. There were some pretty dangerous characters out there. I did come across a lot of the gang leaders of the major U.S. Federal prison gangs, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, Texas Syndicate. A lot of the gang leaders were there, so I got to see those guys, and most of them were not too bad to deal with. They were pretty decent as far as working with the staff. They didn't want to cause any troubles. They were hoping to get out to a regular penitentiary again, which I don't know if it ever happened or not. But I had the bombers of the '93 Trade Center bombing were there. Ramzi Youssef and Ayad Ismail was there. Had Ted Kaczynski.
Right.
Tim McVeigh was there before he got executed, so I had a lot of contact with him. We had a special housing unit that I worked quite a bit where those high profile guys were. So I had a lot of contact with all of those guys. And it was an interesting place to work. Very different, very, very high security. You had to be on your toes all the time. Inmates did not come out of their cells unless they were handcuffed and leg ironed, and 3 staff to 1 inmate. If we had fights in the rec yard, we didn't open the doors no matter what was happening until we had at least 3 officers to every inmate that was in that yard. There normally weren't more than 12 to 15 inmates in a rec yard at any given time. But we would not go into there until we had enough staff to make sure everybody was safe. It was pretty wild.
Oh, absolutely. And I know from personal experience, when you're dealing with the high profile ones, it seems like every one of those high profile has a different policy, or they get treated different than everybody else does. So that always makes it difficult too, trying to keep track of who gets what and what administration's given them. So you go out to the ADX for a few years, you come back to Springfield. You retired April 2011, is that right?
Yes, sir. April 30th, 2011, yes.
20 years in there, and then what'd you do after that?
I spent time just trying to figure out, I retired, and I don't know if you want me to tell this story, but I retired because of a family tragedy. I hadn't planned on retiring in 2011. I was only 51. I just had my 20 years, and I'd planned on going till at least 55, maybe the mandatory retirement age of 57. That had been my plans, but a family tragedy came up that required more time than I had to give if I were working full time. So that's why I went ahead and pulled the plug earlier than I'd planned to there in 2011. I retired and spent the first couple of years essentially just keeping my family together, helping the family get over the trauma of the tragedy and kind of just rebuilding things in our family. But once I got that done, I started looking at possibly going into ministry, which had been my goal from the time I was 18 years old when I went off to Bible college. It just never seemed to work out. I just decided to do whatever job came in front of me, which was with the federal prison job. But when that was over, and once the family got back together and we were kind of on an even keel, I started looking at going into a ministry of some kind and looking at some various churches. This church that I'm in now called me in 2014 and asked me to come just fill in the pulpit for a couple of weeks because they were in between pastors and looking for one. So I went and preached for them for a couple of weeks. I've been preaching and teaching in churches all through my life while I was working in the prison or even in the Marines. I was doing a lot of preaching and teaching, just never as a vocational occupation. This church called me. I went and preached a couple times. They called me a couple of weeks after I finished the 3 weeks of preaching and said, we kind of like what we heard. Would you mind staying around and just being our pastor? So we talked about it, and here I am. I've been there 8 years now.
Right. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you about because, you know, one of the things I struggled with, and I talked about it in an earlier podcast, was my faith and corrections, the things I saw and how that affected me and how it still affects me. I mean, I'm retired now, but it's still, I have a hard time reconciling everything I've seen with the faith that I grew up with. But you and there were a couple other officers who I found at work that really, I think that was what got you through. It seemed to be it got you through work each day was your faith and the resilience I saw in you. Of course, when that family tragedy happened, that was another thing I was just, I'm going to say in awe of was the resilience that you showed taking on so much responsibility and everything that went with that. When it comes to your faith, and I know you weren't quiet about it at work. I never heard you preach to an inmate, but you didn't have any problem at all telling an inmate, this is what the Bible says. So how did you reconcile all that while you were working?
I'd be honest with you. There was a time in my career in the late 90s, mostly when I was at the ADX. I'd been in corrections for a number of years, 8 or 9 years, and there at the ADX with the extreme darkness of that place, spiritual darkness. I mean, just the evil that was there. It was really getting to me, and it was starting to affect my family. It was starting to affect my life outside of prison. I was getting angry all the time. Like you said, I was having a hard time reconciling the evil that I had to deal with every day with just life and what I thought life was supposed to be. And I struggled with that for a number of months. And then one day, just as I was praying to God, I was like, God, I'm so tired of all this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to make life better outside of prison because it seems like this prison life is destroying me. So in that prayer time, it's like I heard inside me a small voice that said, those inmates are men. They're people. And they're people just like you. They've just done some bad things and they've let evil get the best of them. You can't let it get the best of you. You need to start treating those guys like they are people. Matter of fact, one of the things that kept coming to mind was, Wally, why don't you pray for those inmates like you pray for other people? And I was thinking to myself, nah, I don't think I want to do that. I don't like these guys. Why would I want to pray for them? Why would I want to pray for inmates that hate me? And why would I want to do that? And it just kept coming back to me that when Jesus said, love your enemies, and like, these guys are my enemies in a great sense. And so I thought, well, let me just go ahead and do what I can. So I literally came to work and started at the beginning of my shift, as early as I could in my shift. I sat down and went through my inmate roster. I prayed for every inmate in my unit. I prayed for all the staff that I was working with in that particular unit. And it wasn't a real long, drawn out prayer. I just said a quick prayer for every one of them individually by name. And strange things started happening. I never would have believed it. But my attitude started changing. No longer did I hate them because I found out I can't pray for somebody and hate them at the same time. So I didn't hate them anymore. Of course, I didn't love them like I loved my family, my wife, or other friends, but I didn't hate them. And then another strange thing started happening. They started becoming more cooperative with me. It's like when I started treating them as human beings, as men, they were more cooperative with me, and I actually was able to get some troubled inmates to do things that other officers couldn't get them to do. So they started becoming more cooperative. So I think what the main thing was, I do believe in the power of prayer, and I believe prayer helped, not so much with the inmates as it helped with me. It changed my attitude. And once my attitude was better with them and gave them the basic human respect that they I believe every man, woman, or child deserves. Once I started giving them that basic human respect, because my attitude had changed, their attitude toward me started changing. And I think that's what made the difference for me. And I continued that policy on through the rest of my career, where I started just saying a quick prayer for the inmates that I worked around or the staff that I worked around. And it kept me from getting bitter and angry and hateful toward the people and the environment that I had to work in. I think that's what got me through, to be honest with you. I really do.
Interesting. Um, that's just a great story there and how that helped you. I also have, and you tell me if I'm on the right track here. I've told rookies for years when they ask me what's the most important thing they could do, and I tell them, be yourself. Don't go in there and be somebody else.
Yeah.
Be who you are. Do you think up to that point, maybe you weren't bringing to work who you truly were, and that's what the inmates responded to, that they saw, oh, well, that's just who that guy is?
I think you're right. I was trying to be the hard-nosed character that I thought an officer was supposed to be. I was trying to be that, and it wasn't me. It was making me into something I wasn't, and I think they could see the falsehood. I think everybody around me could see the falsehood that I just wasn't being real. So when I started being me and just being a man working with other men that were under my custody, I think it started changing things. My attitude definitely changed, and I think it started. I think it helped with them too. I think you're right.
Absolutely. Great advice and a great story there for rookies who may be struggling with that also. From there, I guess the next thing I knew that you did outside of retirement was your Toastmasters. Can you tell us a little bit about Toastmasters and what you did with that? Because I think it's a great story.
I joined Toastmasters, and actually in 2006, while I was still working at the prison, I did it as an outlet to do something. I didn't have a lot of hobbies. I didn't have a lot of things I did. I did a little bit of motorcycle riding, but I didn't really have anything that I did outside of work just for fun. And so I enjoyed public speaking. Like I said, I'd done a lot of preaching and teaching over the years. I'd even taught a little bit of public speaking out of my home to some teenage homeschool groups. But I wanted to get better at being a speaker, and I wanted just an outlet, just a place where I could go and do something different, which for me was fun. Like I said, a lot of people are deathly afraid of public speaking, and it would be torture for them. But for me, it was fun. So I joined this club in Springfield, began attending the meetings twice a month, found out that they had competitions twice a year, which I love competition. I'm a very competitive individual. So I began entering these competitions, and shortly after I began entering, began winning. And it took me a couple of years, but I started competing in 2007, and in 2013, after several years of practice and winning some and losing some, I actually made it to the semifinals of the World Championship of Public Speaking in both 2013 and then 2014 as well. I became a semifinalist, and I didn't win. I didn't go any past that particular stage. I didn't even place in my particular round in the semifinals. But making it to that stage was a big deal for me. A big deal for me, because I used to be very nervous about public speaking when I was young. It took me a lot of years to get to where I could stand in front of people and share a message or a speech. But it just became second nature to me, and I love doing it now. And I actually have begun every year since back in 2011 or 2007, the warden at the Springfield prison asked me to create a 3-day public speaking seminar for his leadership development group that he had put together, because he knew I was in Toastmasters and knew I enjoyed the public speaking. So I put together this 3-day seminar and began presented it every year to each leadership development group for a 3-day seminar up until I retired. And then actually the summer I retired, they had me come back and do the same seminar for that leadership development group. After that, it was another year or so before they called me again. But every year since then, I've been going back and teaching usually just a 4-hour session on public speaking to a different group every year. And actually just did it a couple of months ago there at the prison. So it's become a standard thing. They actually pay me as a consultant now to come back and teach that class, because they know that if they want to be a leader even in a prison, if you want to be a leader, you're going to be standing in front of people speaking, and it's a good idea to be competent at it. So people, if you speak clearly, people listen to you, you can gain their attention quickly, And it's a lot of the people I've taught in years past in those public speaking seminars have become leaders and in their career, and they improved their career and moved up the ladder a little bit within the Bureau. Several of them actually in supervisory positions now.
Absolutely. I'm one of them. I was either in that, I think you and I may have been in that leadership class, that first one, but I know that you came and did the talk, public speaking, and I learned a lot from
Right.
that. I know it's served me well over the many years since then. So now you are staying busy, and it looks like you've kind of stepped off into the political ring the last few years. Tell me about that.
Yes, I have stayed very busy. I joke around now with people when I talk about retirement. I tell them that if you offered me a well-paying full-time job, I wouldn't have time to do it. I don't have time. My schedule is just too booked up right now to be doing anything new as far as a full-time job. But I did launch into the political scene 2 years ago. Actually, several years ago, I made a first foray into it. I ran for the Republican nomination for state representative in a 2013 special election that had been called because our state representative at the time had gotten appointed to a different position. Actually, I believe the state probation and parole board with the state of Missouri. So we had an open seat and we had a special election being held, and I vied for that nomination. Didn't get it at the time, but I did a little bit of campaigning with the committee here in Lawrence County. I stayed out of it for a while because a good friend of mine became our state representative, and I supported him and actually worked for him. Went to Jeff City and worked for him for one session in 2014 as his assistant and did a lot of legislative work there with him, and kind of grew to like it and despise it at the same time. It's one of those love-hate relationships. But there was just I realized there were a lot of things I could do that were good. So I literally waited until my friend Mike Moon termed out of his seat in 2020. That was his last year in the House. So in that 2020 election, it was an open seat. I ran during that election, ran a pretty hard campaign, a three-way race, and lost the election by 284 votes. Just about destroyed. I thought, man, that's crazy. I worked this hard and lost by such a small amount. But I realized that the gentleman who beat me, good man though he is, basically won by throwing a lot of money at it. He threw nearly $50,000 into the race. I spent $7,000 that I had raised, and still he only won by 284 votes. So essentially he bought the election. I wasn't sure if I was going to do it again after losing that time and working so hard. But over the last 2 years, I had a number of people that supported me in 2020 that said, we really want you to run again against this guy and beat him. And so I took all that advice or took all that counsel from some of those friends and supporters of mine and jumped into the race again this year against an incumbent, which is always a difficult thing to unseat an incumbent. But I have a lot of support. In fact, one of the gentlemen who took third place last time in that three-way race, he has supported me. So I believe this year it might be a little different. I think a lot of his voters will come my way if I can keep the voters that voted for me before, and maybe win over some of the voters that voted for the current representative. I think I get a good chance to win. All I have to do is make up 284 votes difference. So we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping if I don't win this time, I doubt I will probably make another run into a political position. But we'll see how it goes. It's hard to predict. Election comes up 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, 234 votes. That's a tough loss. So tell me a little bit about your platform. I know you well enough to know that you're a conservative, but tell me about your platform and some of the things you want to go to Jeff City to do.
Well, I could tell you all the standard conservative Republican things. I'm pro-life, pro-Constitution. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in traditional marriage between a man and a woman. I know that's not real popular nowadays. I believe that God created two genders, male and female. He created them in Genesis chapter 2, or Genesis chapter 1, and I don't think that's changed. I'm just conservative that way. But as far as what I want to do in Jeff City, there are two main legislative priorities that I want to look at in Jeff City. One is the support of our local public schools. I'm finding as I've talked to people in our community, and I've been substitute teaching in our local schools for a number of years now, just to have something to do and get to know people in our community. And I've seen the difficulty that especially our small rural schools here in Southwest Missouri, the difficulty they have with funding, with budgeting, with hiring teachers. And it seems like the state is not making it easier, but making it harder. And I've talked to every one of our school superintendents in our district, except for one, and I've gained their support because I told them, I said, I want to do what's right for you here in Southwest Missouri. I don't care what the national or what the state education board says or what the state education teachers union says. If it's right for Southwest Missouri, that's what I want to do. And I will do everything I can to fight to make sure our teachers here in Southwest Missouri have what they need and our educators have what they need to educate our children well. I mean, the next generation of workers, leaders, teachers, educators, doctors, lawyers, they're all coming. Most, 85, 95% of those people are coming from our public schools. So why don't we take care of them? And I don't think we have been doing a great job of doing that. So I want to do what I can to support and fight for what's right for our local public schools. The other thing that I want to take to Jeff City and do, and I've spoken with a couple of folks that are in the field of nurse practitioners, healthcare, and I found out that Missouri ranks nearly last among states on restrictions for nurse practitioners. We have laws on the books for nurse practitioners, guidelines that are about 3 decades old. They were instituted back in the 90s when nurse practitioner actually became a thing. They created all these laws and rules and regulations. They are so restrictive that it's very hard for a nurse practitioner to do his or her job and provide health care. And I don't want to go through what all those regulations are. It would be boring to most people, but it's very, very restrictive. And I've talked to the director of the state agency for nurse practitioners, the state association for nurse practitioners, and I want to carry that banner and try to get some of these rules changed. And that's going to be a hard fight because I guess the physician lobby in Missouri is pretty strong, and they fought that real hard for a number of years. Obviously, because they're afraid that maybe it's going to cut into their profits, it's going to take patients away from them. I'm not sure what the deal is, but they fought making some of those changes. But I think if we can make it a little bit easier for a person to attain the certification, I don't want to make it easy to where they don't know what their job. Obviously, we still have to have some type of regulation and standards so that a nurse practitioner does know how to do his or her job and how to take care of patients. But the restrictions, if we can remove some of the restrictions, make it a little bit easier for them to start their own practice, we would be able to provide health care to rural Missouri where we don't have it right now. There are small towns all across Missouri, not just here in Southwest Missouri, but all around rural Missouri, that a doctor can't afford to go into that town and practice because they have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical bills to pay from their 12 years of training. Mm-hmm. They can't afford to go in there and with a small population and make a living. But a nurse practitioner, having maybe not as much training, but enough training to do basic health care, could afford to go in and start a practice under the supervision of a doctor that may be an hour or two away, but still have somebody that they can call and with questions on certain medical conditions, some supervisory capacity there. But they would be able to go into these small communities and provide health care to a lot of rural Missouri that doesn't have it right now. So those are probably my two biggest legislative priorities that I want to go to Jeff City and fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you and I both have worked in government for a long time, and one of the other things you've talked about is government accountability. Being in a position that you're going to be in, you'll get to take a look at some of these budgets. I know the Federal Bureau of Prisons last year was $7.7 billion spent on prisons in this country. We don't spend that on education. We don't spend that on nursing homes. the Missouri Department of Corrections in this last budget, there was a $50 million court settlement for officers for overtime costs that they had to come up with in a budget.
Mm.
And those amounts of money that we're spending on these inmates, that we're spending on our prisons, which I'm not talking about staff pay. Staff they need more than what they get in most of these prisons. But, at the federal level, that's $51,333 an inmate that we're spending of our tax money on these guys. You got any ideas on, how we can make that better? Or, could we go back to the old system of, opening up Algoa as a beef farm and Church Farm as a dairy and letting those inmates, self-sustain themselves a little, because they don't at all anymore. You got any thoughts on that?
Not a lot of detailed thoughts, but my plan or goal as a representative is to gather around me people that are experts in these fields. So I've talked to school superintendents, I've talked to healthcare workers. My plan would be to talk to those people in the Missouri Department of Corrections, people that know the business, know the job, to see what we could do to cut cost. I think you're right. I don't know why we don't go back to inmates raising some of their own food. I know Springfield used to raise their own chickens and their own gardens and had their own vegetables. I know a lot of it has to do with spending and contracts, and by law in some places you have to give contracts to people in your local community so they can. We go into a government goes into a place, gets property or buys property or is given to them, and they have to agree to give a certain amount of money back to the community. I think that may be part of it, but there has to be a way we can modify that some to where inmates can provide some of their own food costs and things like that. I don't know. I don't know all the answers, but I do know that if we get enough people together that are experts in their field, we can come up with some answers. Because we have got to be better as governments, both state government and federal governments. We have to do better in spending the money that we take in taxes. I mean, literally, we're taking it in taxes. We're taking money out of people's pay for taxes, and we're taking it at the store when they go to buy things, and yet we're so often wasteful with that spending and with that money, and that, to me, that's nearly a crime. We have got to do better at handling the money that we get from taxes from our constituents, from people and citizens in the state and the nation. And until we do that, we're never going to solve the problems. We have got to do better at taking care of this money. Accountability is a big issue, and I think there's a lot of places in the state of Missouri we can cut costs that we're wasting money. Corrections may be one of those places. Certainly, I used to have a son that was in probation and parole as part of the Department of Corrections, and the pay is terrible. The working hours and working conditions. I mean, it's law enforcement, so it's not going to be a pleasant working conditions. But they certainly don't do anything to make it easier on the staff, and they overwork them because they don't have enough of them, because they don't pay them enough to keep people. So there's got to be things we can do to better train our staff, to better equip the staff to do their job. And cut costs. I don't know all the answers, but I know there are people. If we put enough heads together, we can find the answers. And that's one of the things I want to lead the effort to do, to be able to find those answers, so we can do what government's supposed to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess when I think about it, we're looking for places that we need tax revenue to do so many things. School. What about school security and our prison systems across this country, across the world, are just eating up so much of that tax base. But that's my thoughts on it. One more question that kind of refers, and I don't know if you've looked at this or seen it. So last week, and you've been out of the Bureau of Prisons for a few years now, but last week they named the new director for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Any thoughts on getting a new director that's outside of the Bureau of Prisons, which is a first? Well, I guess it's not a first. Mark Inch, they brought in from the military for like 8 months, but then he left and went to the Florida Department of Corrections. The Bureau of Prisons has never really brought staff from the outside to run the Bureau. And this Colette Peters, she's been the director of the Oregon Department of Corrections. pretty progressive from what I understand, has some new thoughts on how to do some of this stuff. But any thoughts on, since you work there, on what it's going to be like having a director from the outside, good or bad?
Yeah, I don't know. I think overall it could be a good thing. One of the things that happens is when we always promote from within, and I know a lot of times even within the local prisons, or Springfield, some of the other prisons, they shied away for a while. They shied away from promoting from within. They always brought in outside minds. They brought it, they promoted a lieutenant. They brought someone from another prison, brought him to Springfield as with a promotion, so they had new ideas. And I think there's a lot to that. Now I do like the idea they've gone back to in recent years. A number of people are being promoted from within, moving up the ranks for lieutenant, so forth there within the prison. And probably it's happening in other prisons as well. But I think the general idea of bringing some in from outside with new ideas and new ways of doing things, it helps us to get a better, well-rounded view. Sometimes when we're in one place for a long time, we get used to doing it the same way, and it ends up not being the best way. Or if something changes, we don't want to change with it because we're so used to doing it our way. So I think we could see some good things from a director outside, that's coming from outside the Bureau, as long as this director is willing to come in and realize that he or she can't change everything all at the same time. Nobody would want to do that, and everybody would resist that. But if she can come in with ideas and begin to slowly implement some ideas and bringing in a new perspective, I don't know that would be such a bad thing. That might be a good thing. Because I know we saw a lot of rotation with lieutenants and staff coming from other prisons, and it did bring some new ideas, and it did create some tension at times. But sometimes we do get too used to doing it our way, and we can't see any other way until somebody points it out.
Right, maybe a different perspective. Well, Wally, what else do you have coming up? I know you got the election coming up in a couple of weeks. Anything else you got on your plate, or is that pretty much got it full right now?
That's pretty much it. It's full right now. I'm busy with the campaigning with 2 weeks left, getting out, talking to folks, putting up a few more signs. It's just a busy time. My wife and I are trying to fit in a little bit of a anniversary celebration later on this evening. So I'll probably take a break from campaigning for that. Of course, that's how we stay married, right, for 42 years, and make her a priority no matter what else is going on. How that is. No, it's just been busy. We've got to keep the church running and keep preaching, keep teaching. We've got things going on at our church that we're trying to grow. The COVID thing that hit really every church in the area, small and large alike, has seen a decline in attendance since COVID hit, and most of them have not seen a return in that attendance. And we're a small church, and we're seeing the same thing. So we're talking about some things we can do to improve that, to get people coming back to church. A lot of people have gotten used to watching church online, and we do keep our sermons online as well. Northside Baptist Church on Facebook in Mount Vernon, Missouri. We keep our sermons online for people that can't come to church, but I think some people have gotten used to that, and so they just don't come back because I can just do it from the comfort of my own living room. And while that's true, I think there's a great benefit for being around your brothers and sisters in the church, and I think we're just working on how we can get people to come back. So we've got some things to do. I've got a lot of things on my plate. I enjoy life, though. I mean, life is good right now. Mike, the prison, I don't miss it at all. You may be the same way. I don't miss working there. I miss the people I used to work with. I try to keep in touch with some of them from time to time, especially on Facebook. Facebook's been a great thing for me on that aspect. I keep in touch with a lot of my old friends and coworkers. I don't miss working there. I love the life I have now. I love the fact that I've got retirement. I've got a retirement pay that I don't need to worry about making a lot of money outside of my retirement. I mean, we live a pretty simple life. We're doing well financially. I enjoy life. Life is good. And I just continue to, if I win this election, of course, I'll be serving in Jeff City. If I don't, there's a lot of other things. I actually plan on writing a couple of books, and I might get those books done sooner if I'm not elected. So, we'll see. God has a plan for my life, and I'll whichever plan gets laid out before me, I'll walk down that path. That's just the way I've always lived. I didn't plan on working at the federal prison, but that kind of is what was laid out in front of my path, and I worked it. And it was a good thing I did, because when I needed to retire in 2011, I was able to. God knew things that I didn't know about my life, and He put me where I needed to be so that I could retire when I needed to retire. So I'll just continue to live the same way. Enjoy life. Take what comes my way and make the best with it. That's the way we've always lived. I'll just continue doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you completely. Once you retire, I don't know that we miss the day-to-day of the job, but I do miss the camaraderie. I do miss the people I worked with. Of course, Corrections has some of the best people in the country, in my opinion. If someone wanted to support you or support your campaign or learn more about what you're doing, where can they reach you at, Wally? Where can they find info?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, they can go to friendsofwallylong.com. It's a website. It's a very simple website, but there is a donation button on there if they wanted to find out a little bit about what I believe and what I stand for. If they wanted to support the campaign, they can do it through the donation button there. I do a lot of posting on our Facebook page. It's Wally Long for Missouri, or Wally Long for State Representative, I believe is actually how it's listed. But they can go to my Facebook page, Wally Long for State Representative, or my private Facebook page. They can also find it from there, Wally Long. And there is contact information there if anybody has questions about what I believe or what I stand for, or if they have suggestions about what needs to be done in Jeff City. I'd be glad to hear those as well. They can write me through my email, wally@wallylong.com, and send me a question or suggestion. I just want to be a representative that actually represents people, that takes care of the people in our district, not a politician that is just says one thing and does another. So I'm open to any and all suggestions about what needs to happen or needs to be done. But they can contact me through my Facebook page, Wally Long for Missouri, or friendsofwallylong.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being on here today. I think you're a great example for those officers that are listening. And I know we've all been there where, the day gets tiring working in the prison, but I think your resilience and your faith and your leadership have been something that other people can look at, and maybe it'll help them get through. So thank you for being here today, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.